What is up, ladies and gentle nerds? It's your boy Graham, also known as HamHocks42 on the internet, and today we are looking at a special card from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. That's right, it wouldn't be an episode of Overthinking MTG if we didn't take a look at some upcoming spoilers and really dive into them, take a look at what they can do, what they're all about, and today I want to talk about a very specific one that gets my imagination going, which is exactly what I want to see in cards, especially in previews. Like when we see a new preview, we want to be excited. We want to be overjoyed at the possibilities and see some opportunities here. And especially in early preview season when we haven't seen the rest of the set yet, because it gives us an idea of what we can expect from the rest of the set. Not only what can we do with current cards, but what can we do with future cards as well that are coming in Kamigawa. Also, I just need to say before we dive into it, or before I pull the card up, Kamigawa Neon Dynasty looks amazing. If you don't agree with that, I'm sorry, but I can't wait. I'm really, really excited. I think the sci-fi elements are going to be fun, and it's a return to a plane that I played way back in the day, and I'm very excited to see how it's changed over time. I think they have a really cool opportunity there, and I hope they hit it out of the park. And so far, it's looking good. So the card I want to talk about specifically today is none other than Satoru Umezawa. I'm sure I butchered that pronunciation, but Satoru Umezawa is a 2/4 for 1 blue-black, so Dimir, classic colors for the theme of this particular card, and it is a human ninja. Of course it's a ninja because we're in Kamigawa and we're in Dimir. So what other style would there be but ninjas? Now let's take a look at what Satoru does. Whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, look at the top 3 cards of your library. There's a lot to unpack there. But I'm going to get into that in a second. Put one of them into your hand and the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. So you're effectively drawing cards and you have some selection over what those cards are. And this ability triggers only once each turn. Okay, so you can't like go completely bonkers infinite with it, which is good. That's for the best, because there are ways around, not necessarily infinite triggers, but if you were able to get 3 or 4 triggers on this in a given turn, especially late in the game, the amount of value you could run away with is pretty insane. But you can't do that here. So the reason that I mentioned there's a lot to unpack in that first sentence is because whenever you activate a ninjutsu ability, I really want to point that out. Ninjutsu is an ability, and if you're not familiar with ninjutsu, the way that it works, and I've talked about it on this podcast before, but the way that ninjutsu works is if a creature is attacking and unblocked, so you have to be past the declare blockers phase, you are able to pay the ninjutsu cost of the creature in your hand. It activates an ability that puts the creature onto the battlefield and bounces the unblocked creature back to your hand. So it turns the attacking creature into the ninja, basically. It swaps places. But the cool part about that is it puts the creature back in your hand as well, so you can replay it. So creatures with enter the battlefield triggers are great to synergize with ninjas. Especially evasive. It's like small evasive creatures or creatures with enter the battlefield abilities, or preferably both. They work great with ninjas. So that's really cool. And so what Satoru does is it refills your hand with more and more creatures or more and more cards as you're activating ninja abilities, which presumably are putting more and more ninjas into your hand, which allows you to activate more and more abilities. Now, Satoru has one other key piece of text on it, which says, each creature card in your hand has ninjutsu for 2 blue-black. That text alone blows my mind. If this had nothing else, that would be worth the price of admission, and I would want this card in most of my decks. Now, it works in such a way that Satoru is good if you're in a deck that already has cheap ninjas. If you have cheap ninjas, it's great because you get value off that first ability. In a deck that doesn't have any ninjas, you can still get value off the second ability because now all of a sudden, everything's a ninja. Like all of your creatures are ninjas that ninja in for 4. That's incredible. Like, there's a lot of talk on Twitter right now about like what cards you could and couldn't use as ninjas. Like with Emrakul being the one that everybody mentions, because yeah, like a 15/15 coming in out of nowhere and attacking unblocked. Yeah, that's pretty good. You can do a lot with that, but you don't even have to go that far. You can find a lot of phenomenal cards that have cool effects and cool abilities when they deal damage to a player that. Maybe they're just a little too expensive because that ability is very, very strong. Or the other thing that's worth noting is once you've cheated the creature into play, they're in play. They do enter the battlefield. They're not treated as like having phased in or anything crazy like that. So you do get any ETB triggers for your ninjas. You do get combat damage to the face triggers for your ninjas. Creatures with incredibly high power all of a sudden can become one-hit kills. Like all of a sudden a 1/1 flyer that your opponent can't block could suddenly become, I don't know, a Sarah avatar or something that's very, very large, and all of a sudden it just be deadly, and that's game. It's over. That's fantastic. Like there's so many cool things you can do with it. One card that comes to my mind to use with that ability is Mind Leech Mass, which is a card that was originally printed back in the OG Ravnica. It's a 6/6 for 8 with trample that says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may look at that player's hand. If you do, you may play a non-land card in it without paying that card's mana cost. This is a great example, and this is probably not the best example of a card that you can cheat in with Satoru's ability. Just to give you an idea, this is just scratching the surface on what we can do there. It's fantastic. I gotta say, I absolutely adore this idea. Because you're able to cheat these huge threats in, and then you have them in play. And the other thing that's absolutely crazy from a curve perspective, Satoru is a 3-drop, and it's a 2/4, so he's got a really big, decent-sized toughness, and he's also a human and a ninja, which are 2 very relevant creature types. And then the fact that he gives all cards in your hand ninjutsu for 4, if you play a small threat on 1 or 2, or both, that is difficult to block. So can you imagine a Changeling Outcast, which is an unblockable 1/1 on turn 1, anything you want on turn 2, maybe a bounce for one of your opponent's things, then turn 3, Satoru Umezawa, turn 4, Mind Leech Mass, Ninjutsu in off the Changeling Outcast. That's just one idea off the top of my head. And we could probably do we could probably do those kinds of things in Standard. We can do those kinds of things in, you can't do that would have to be historic for, and it wouldn't have to be Mind Leech Mass, it'd have to be something else. But anyway, I'm just saying, this is a situation that will be very easy to set up. It will not be difficult to curve out in such a way that 3-drop Satoru into a turn 4 something huge. Some kind of huge monster. Can you imagine? Can you imagine playing in a Dimir deck and cheating in a Cultivator Colossus on turn 4 using Satoru's ability, and then playing out 3 additional lands and drawing 3 fresh cards? Like, that's something that you'll be able to do with this. That's incredible. Cheating out a Toxrill, for example, is another fine option that could get absolutely out of hand. We are going to see ninja decks running 4 Toxrills because Satoru Umezawa is available to help cheat it into play. That's insane. It deals 7 damage to your opponent's face directly, and then it slowly kills your opponent's board. That's incredible. This is going to be... Now, that said, Satoru does have one key flaw, which might make it borderline unplayable in the current Standard and historic environments, which blows my mind, frankly. The fact that these words are about to come out of my mouth is an indicator of how far we have come as far as power creep is concerned. Satoru Umezawa is a 3-drop that does nothing the turn it comes into play. There's no enter the battlefield trigger, and it doesn't protect itself in any way. There's no hexproof, there's no protection from a certain color, there's no indestructible. It's a 2/4 body. Now, the 4 toughness is real. That helping us burn, I suppose. But this is going to be a must-kill threat on turn 3. Your opponent's probably going to have removal on turn 3. So Satoru Umezawa is probably going to get picked off the moment they drop pretty much every time, which is going to be unfortunate. However, if Satoru survives, your opponent is in for a world of hurt, and that's awesome. Now, the other thing that I find interesting about this card is that Satoru is an Umezawa, which is a surname that we've seen a lot in Magic in the past. The original Umezawa, if I'm not mistaken, was actually a card from Legends named Tetsuo Umezawa, which I just feel like it's worth calling out that this particular surname goes all the way back to Legends, which is very interesting. Now, I don't know the story behind Tetsuo Umezawa. I don't know if they were from... if they were eroded to be from Kamigawa or what the story is there, but it's interesting. When we go into the more recent Kamigawa sets, we have Toshiro Umezawa as well, who is the only wielder of you probably know him. Toshiro Umezawa was a card in Betrayers of Kamigawa that was interesting. It wasn't particularly great, but it had a cool ability and was kind of a fun commander built around. Like, it's a neat card, but it was never really phenomenal. It was a 2/2 for 3 with Bushido, which Bushido. That's a whole other can of worms, or as they say across the pond, a whole other kettle of fish. And whenever a creature an opponent controls is put into a graveyard from play, you may play target instant card from your graveyard. So when creatures die, you give your stuff flashback, and then if that card would be put in your graveyard this turn, removed from the game instead. So it's kind of neat. You can like chain kill spells together and do some fun things with that. So it's a cool card. You can do some interesting things with it, but it only works if your opponent has creatures and only if they're dying. So it's a little too fringe to use. However, Toshiro is probably better known as the wielder of Umezawa's Jite, which was a card that made a ton of waves across a ton of formats. This card is absolutely phenomenal and incredibly powerful. I just want to call this out because if you're like, Umezawa, that sounds familiar. Yep. Umezawa's Jite. This card was wielded by the Umezawa family, and it'd be interesting to see if we see an homage to it or a nod to it in some way in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. I'd be surprised if we don't. I'd be surprised if we don't see a powered down Jite of some kind. This card, however, is probably never going to get reprinted. I'm calling that now. It's way too powerful. Although power creep is such a thing that maybe it would fit just fine nowadays. I don't know. But in any event, Satoru Umezawa has a ton of utility, a ton of interesting abilities. It's a legendary creature, so you can play this as your commander, and there's a lot of interesting synergies and interesting counterplay, because if you have multiple ninjas that can ninjutsu in for 1, 2, or 3, all of a sudden being able to get multiple ninja triggers or being able to get cheap ninja triggers fast and early with Satoru Umezawa means that you'll actually be able to potentially, on turns 5, 6, 7, etc., get value the moment Satoru hits the field. Because if Satoru hits the field, you attack with some other team members, and then cheat in, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example, like a Ninja of the Deep Hours, for example. You cheat that in for 2, you draw a card off the Ninja of the Deep Hours, and you get the Satoru Umezawa trigger. Great, you just drew 2 cards off of a 2-mana interaction. Nice. Yeah, so that's just good times. You can get a lot of value out of that. So that's one way to build it. The other way to build it is non-ninjas and use Satoru Umezawa as a way to ramp them and cheat them into play. And so you can have Toxtrolls. You can have cards that are even off color, like Cultivator Colossus, or I'm trying to get another good example, Ancient Green Warden, maybe. I don't know. I mean, Velomachus Lorehold, my boy, my beloved Velomachus. Although Velomachus actually is a good example of one that probably is not valuable to use in this case, because Velomachus Lorehold has an ability that says when he attacks, you do a thing. When you ninjutsu in a creature, you're activating the ability ninjutsu and placing them onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. They are entering the battlefield attacking, which means you never go through the moment where you declare them as an attacker. And so if they have a trigger on them that says do such and such when this creature attacks, that trigger does not occur, because that trigger occurs when you declare them as an attacker. So Velomachus has an ability where you free cast something when he's declared as an attacker. If you ninjutsu him in with Satoru Umezawa, you do not get that ability. So all of a sudden, what makes Velomachus such an amazing reanimator target, all of a sudden makes Velomachus not that great of a ninja. That's right, we're talking about a gigantic elder dragon not being a particularly good ninja. Man, magic is weird, and I love it. So thank you so much for hanging out. This has been a delight. Oh, the other detail that I feel like is worth calling out, I mentioned that ninjutsu is an ability. Your opponent cannot use counter spells to counter ninjutsu. That's very important. So the fact that these creatures are entering the battlefield, you're playing them from your hand, so it feels like you're casting a spell, but you are not. That is an ability. So if your opponent is sitting on a disallow or even a divide by 0, now divide by 0 is not a great example because they can target the ninja once it hits play, but they cannot target the ability itself, which is nice. But if your opponent's sitting on a didn't say please or a saw it coming and really hoping to prevent that from happening, nope, it's going to happen. You better be sitting on a stifle or tail's end, otherwise this is coming into play. And that's just how it works. And it feels great. Yeah. So Satoru Umezawa, I cannot wait. The other thing that this tells us about Kamigawa Neon Dynasty is we will probably see a fair number of ninjas, and that makes me very happy. I can't wait to see the black Nizumi, the rat ninjas. I can't wait to see the human ninjas in blue, and to see what we get from them. That is going to be very exciting. I'm going to be looking at that particular archetype with great interest, because I have played a lot of ninjas in my day, and I just find them incredibly fun. So thank you so much for hanging out. I appreciate you. You can catch me on Twitch, twitch.tv/HamHocks42. Please don't hesitate to like, comment, and subscribe on this video if you are watching on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, thank you so much. If you wouldn't mind dropping a 5-star review in your favorite podcasting app, it would make a world of difference. Thank you so much, and I'll catch you on the next one.